Hello, everyone. It's Mrs. Wallace. How you doing? This is Mrs. Wallace from the couch. I hope all is well. Trying to do the best we can with the circumstances. So I'm going to do a little video about different kinds of markets. We're headed into looking at a particular market, one of four that we look at, called perfect competition. So that'll be the focus today to just kind of kick that off. Before we do that, looking at just reviewing two questions with you about kinds of profit, and this relates to yesterday's lesson about implicit and explicit costs. I did get a couple of good questions, especially about normal profit. That can be a very confusing topic. Just remember, with normal profit, firms generally are in a position where they would like to make a positive economic profit. All firms will try to do that. Firms are motivated to make high profits, and all firms will try to do that. If a firm is making zero economic profit, that is different than saying a firm is making zero accounting profit. If a firm says that they have zero economic profit, we assume that they actually have a positive accounting profit. In other words, they're putting some money in their pocket at the end of the day. They are covering, if they have zero economic profit, all of their explicit costs, okay, every single one of them. So they're paying all their bills, plus they're also covering the implicit costs, which might include things like their time or some sort of salary that they gave up in order to take on a new opportunity. So they might indeed walk away with accounting profit, but if you're zero economic profit, that accounting profit is at least the same as the implicit costs. If your implicit costs are greater, you value your time more than what you're going to make in your accounting profit, an economist would say, don't do this. This is a bad idea. That phrase when you say something wasn't worth it, that's what economists are looking out for. They want your profits to be worth it, worth your time, worth what you had to give up, worth, everything that you put into making a decision. So let's look at this multiple choice question. This is from the AP exam. So an example of that kind of, practice question, at least. Economic profits are, and again, economic profits compared to accounting profits. You'll see this in multiple choice questions. You'll see this on free response questions. It is really, anytime we're talking about profits and costs in our class, like with numbers, the profit was 65,000 or whatever, unless we're asked about accounting costs, always make the assumption that we're talking about economic profits and economic costs because, we're economists, right? But let's look at what economic profits are. Are they always larger than accounting profits? A cannot be correct. We know that they cannot be correct because accounting profits are always smaller than economic profits are always smaller than accounting profits because economic profits include both explicit and implicit costs. So as long as there are implicit costs, economic profits will always be smaller. Accounting profits will always be bigger. So that's not correct. The sum of accounting profits and implicit costs. This also cannot be correct. If you had total revenue and you subtracted explicit costs, all your bills, you would have an accounting profit. If you wanted to use that accounting profit to find your economic profit, you'd have to subtract your implicit costs, not add them together. So B cannot be correct. C is also not correct because economic profits would be the difference between total revenues and both implicit and explicit costs. If you just subtract implicit costs, you're not doing the economist job correctly. Economists are kind of like accountants. Explicit costs still matter. We don't only care about implicit costs. We care about both implicit and explicit. D is actually correct. Economic profits are equal to the difference between accounting profits and implicit costs because I can say total revenues minus explicit costs equals accounting profits. If I then go ahead and take away my implicit costs from accounting profits, I will have my economic profits. I could also just say total revenues minus explicit costs plus implicit costs, and I would have the same answer, okay? So D is correct. Let's look at another one. This is one I think that was on the homework sheet yesterday. Gomez runs a small pottery firm. He hires one helper, $12,000 a year. So this is somebody he's like actually paying. We're going to put that in the category of an explicit cost. He's paying labor. He pays annual rent of $5,000. That's a pretty nice annual rent. Let's assume he's got a really small shop, and he spends 20 grand on materials. Okay, so with this, we can say that each one of these costs is an explicit cost. And if we total them together, it would be $37,000 in explicit costs, including the helper, including the rent, and including the materials. Okay, so kind of keep that written down somewhere, $37,000 of explicit costs. He also has $40,000 of his own funds invested in equipment. This is not a cost because there's no new bill here. He had $40,000. He's now invested it into pottery wheels. Until that equipment depreciates, he still has that $40,000 because he can sell those pottery wheels. So that's not a cost at all. It's just a movement of money. But let's assume he had $4,000 of income that he was earning on that 40 grand. Once he moves it into pottery wheels, he's losing that $4,000. So an economist would say that's an implicit cost. That matters because if you decide to go into business, you are no longer going to earn, $4,000 a year, and maybe you paid a bill with that. Maybe that was, your vacation fund or something like that. Something's going to be missing if you don't have that. He also was offered a job to work for a competitor for $15,000. Okay, also an implicit cost. So, he can either do this business or he can make $4,000 on his, his 40 grand and also make 15 grand in another opportunity. He also has some entrepreneurial talents. He can consult, he can do something for an additional 3 grand. So these are all implicit costs. And we want to know, if he is able to do this business, can he cover both his explicit costs, the things he actually has to pay bills on, and his implicit costs? So it's worth it for him. He does. Actually, if we calculate the implicit costs, they add up to $22,000, $15,000 plus $4,000 plus $3,000. So what we can do is then look at the annual revenue. Either we have to figure that out by looking at the price of the pottery times the quantity of the pottery that Gomez sells. But in this case, we're told the annual revenue from pottery sales is $72,000. So always start with your total revenue, subtract your explicit costs of $37,000. They're on the top there. You get an accounting profit of $35,000. That's the money that Gomez has in his pocket at the end of the year. The economic profit is less. Economic profit is always less. Economic profit includes implicit costs. So it's the $35,000 that, Gomez has in his pocket minus the $22,000 of the things he could have been doing if he didn't take on the, opportunity to run this business. So he has an economic profit of $13,000. He should definitely do this business because he's got a positive economic profit. He's taking home an accounting profit of $35,000, and he's covering all of his implicit costs, which tells us there's no better opportunity for him. If he wasn't covering his implicit costs, this would simply not be worth it. Okay, keep kind of working with that information. It is in section 4.4, I believe, in your textbook. And if you have questions about it, see that. Adding some new information, we're going to kind of introduce some things, and then we'll work on it again on Thursday and Friday. There are 4 different markets that businesses can exist in. Let's argue that there's probably many more. In our course, we're going to be looking at 4 primary market models. Okay, so you're a firm, you decide to sell avocados, you're selling, Stanley cups, whatever it is. You can exist in a certain type of market. A lot of this has to do with how much competition there is in the market. One of these markets will be known as pure competition or perfect competition. That is the market we're going to start out with. It is pretty much a theoretical model. We don't really have a lot of products out there that are in a perfectly competitive model. Economists design this to test some assumptions and make some, conclusions that are important about what a market would look like if it was incredibly competitive with lots and lots and lots of firms that were essentially all exactly alike. That would be a little bit unusual. Perhaps the closest we get to perfect competition would be markets in agriculture, because the products are very much the same. A strawberry is kind of like a strawberry, even though today there's organic and all kinds of things. But, some products are really similar to others, and they compete mostly on price. A soybean is a soybean. My soybeans aren't necessarily better than your soybeans, so it's not advertising, Mrs. Wallace's soybeans. This is much more of a product that is competitive based on price. And for the most part, we tend to see very common prices in this market because there cannot be any one firm that has a higher price than another, because then, they lose their market. There's also purely monopolistic. So one firm has 100% of the market. One firm is producing all of the goods, right? To some degree, this can exist in real life. It can exist on a small scale, like, one firm is the only hospital in a certain number of miles or something like that. So there's a variety of ways to look at pure, but pure monopoly means, one firm has 100% of the control. So kind of put on a spectrum, if you will, pure competition on one end and pure monopoly on the other. They are very, very opposite. Lots and lots of competitors, so much competition, can't even believe it. And pure monopoly, no competition whatsoever. Barriers to entry. In pure competition, firms are in and out of this market like crazy. There's also some in-betweens, okay? And don't worry so much about all of the finite details because we spend a lot of time with each one of these. This is really for the purpose of introductions. Monopolistic competition is like pure competition in some ways, in that it's very competitive. A major difference is firms are producing different products in monopolistic competition, the same kind of product, but different versions of it. So, people are going crazy buying, the Stanley mugs, right? The water mugs. Those are hot items. They are the product of a whole bunch of influencers who coordinated with the company that makes these Stanley cups. And, some years ago, they created this massive campaign really targeted at women and targeted at social media to encourage people to buy this particular product, right? Which is a pretty expensive, water bottle, which now apparently has lead on the bottom of it, but that's neither here nor there. Monopolistic competition. If you kind of look at, Hydro Flask and Stanley and perhaps, all the other variety of water containers that people might buy, that is a monopolistically competitive market. It's competitive, but it's competitive on a lot more than price. We're talking about, the colors of the cup and the shape of the cup and the, way the cup makes you feel and, those kinds of things. An oligopoly tends to be like monopoly in some ways, in that there is dominance. A few firms are controlling the market. In the United States, car companies, we do not have thousands and thousands of small car producers in the same way that we have thousands and thousands of retailers for women's jeans or women's shoes or something like that. These are completely different market structures. If you wanted to get into the airline business, for example, it would not be so easy, right? We know that recently JetBlue and Spirit Airlines tried to merge, and the government said, nope, can't do that, because if they merge, their airline would have even more, oligopoly power. This is already an industry that has very few firms in it that have quite a bit of power. If they were to become just like one giant airline, then that would be a problem. Okay, so oligopoly, a few firms, lots of dominance. There will be other aspects of this too, but one thing that you can get from today's lesson is that there are 4 different market models. We're going to be starting with pure or perfect competition. This just gives you an idea of some of the differences. I will post this for the most part. Note that these market models vary on a couple of different things. One is the number of firms, pure competition, very large number of firms, tens of thousands of firms in the market. Monopoly has one. Type of product in pure competition, it's part of the definition that pure competitors are producing a product that's standardized. We'll talk about what that is. In the case of Stanley Cup versus Hydro Flask versus, all the other versions that exist, we would call that a differentiated product. They're all containers that hold water, and you can bring them to school and you can put them in your backpack, and all that's very exciting, but they're different. Okay, so they have a different degree of competition than the product that's exactly the same, say like steel or like, something else. Control over price. Perfect competitors are going to find themselves with very little control over their market. Ask any farmer, they'll tell you that. They have very little control over price. There tends to be a set price. What's the going price for soybeans? In a monopoly, they have considerable price control. Conditions of entry, very easy to be a perfect competitor. Very hard to compete with a monopoly. Usually it's blocked. And non-price competition. Okay, so that's something that we'll get into as we look at the different market models. Jot this down. This becomes important when we look at perfect or pure competition. These are the key characteristics, and we'll talk about each one of these in turn, and then we'll end up just looking at a few numbers, a couple of graphs, and then we'll call it a day. Some of the characteristics, and this is something that you will need to know. You'll need to know the characteristics of perfect competition because they differ from characteristics of other market models. And, relate this to firm theory. When we looked at margin of utility and how and what makes consumers tick, when consumers are choosing, how many apples or how many oranges, we refer to that as consumer theory. This is very much producer theory. Okay, this is related to how do producers behave, how do producers make decisions. A lot of that depends on the market that they sit in. They behave differently if they have a lot of competitors than if they don't have a single competitor. And that makes sense, right? Perfect competition. First characteristic has very large number of sellers, tremendous number of sellers. We also assume that they have a standardized or homogeneous, another word you might see, product, right? An avocado, an orange, a peanut, something that is like kind of standard. We know it when we see it, and one producer's version of it isn't necessarily different than another. In today's day and age, with organic producing, with a lot of alternative products, some markets that we would have traditionally said are homogenous now have a lot of alternative competition. Milk is often traditionally used as a homogeneous product and one for a purely competitive market. Arguably, in today's world, there's a lot of different kinds of milk, so likely it's a little bit more competitive. But the standard milk, dairy milk that one might drink, that's something that is standardized, okay? Pure competition firms are price takers, okay? We're going to look at what this means. This is when we have a firm that is providing, say, avocados, we assume that firms can just set the prices to whatever they want. When you have a lot of competition, that's a lot of pressure to make sure you do not divert from the prices of your competitors, especially if your product is exactly the same. So imagine that, you walked into room 236 and there were a bunch of stands. Say that Tomer had an avocado stand and Kaylin had an avocado stand and, Justin had an avocado stand, and they're all selling their avocados, and say the going rate, is $1 for an avocado. And then, Tomer decides that he's going to sell his avocados for like $4, right? And if you walked in and you looked at all these avocado stands, you would be like, forget Tomer. I'm not going to, have that product because I can get an avocado, for $1 from these other producers. Okay. So Tomer either is going to go out of business or he's going to be forced to be a price taker. The going price, based on what competition is offering, is $1. And that is sad because oftentimes, that's just going to be sad. What we might see Tomer and Kaylin and Justin do is work together to try to have some sort of organization like the Avocado Growers of America, the Avocado, Growers of California, whatever it is. That organization might rally to increase avocado demand so the price for everybody goes up. But it's really hard for Tomer to walk around selling his avocados for more than $1 because it's just not going to happen if competitors are selling the same good at a lower price. And that's what we mean by price taker. Only perfect competition has this like weird part to it where there is absolutely no control over price and there's a going price that's determined by the market. Okay. In a perfectly competitive market, firms can easily enter and exit. It's part of the definition. So, Tomer all of a sudden is going to go out of business. He no longer exists in this market. All of a sudden, we might have, somebody else innocent comes in with another stand and selling avocados at $1. Easy entry and exit. There are no barriers to entry. It's another characteristic. And this weird thing in perfect competition, and we'll spend more time on this on Thursday, there will be a market graph, which is going to look very typical, upward sloping supply curve, downward sloping demand curve. Demand for avocados exists. Demand for milk exists. Demand can increase or decrease. Ask the milk people, right? They're trying to get your generation to drink a lot more milk. They have a whole campaign to do so. They're trying to increase the demand for milk, to increase the market price for milk. So there's a market graph. There's also going to be a firm graph. And a firm graph will be very unique. And we will call this the firm for one company that's selling a perfectly competitive, homogeneous product. Okay. So when we're graphing in perfect competition, we have a market graph and we have a firm graph. And the market is going to set the price for all of the competitors who then take the price. Okay. A couple of other things. So let's look at this Got Milk ad. It's got friends in it. This is an ad from some time ago when the Got Milk campaign was on. This is just an example of how the milk industry tries to raise demand for their product. It is based on not one brand of milk, right? We don't really see ads for, buy this brand of milk or this brand of milk. Milk is milk, but they might work together to try to get us to increase, our demand for milk. And that's a goal of increasing market demand for milk. This is a key thing here. The other thing, and we'll kind of, wind this down in just a little bit, from the firm's perspective. Okay, so let's imagine that this is now Tomer's avocado stand. He's one of 1,000 avocado stands. And let's say this time around, the price that all competitors are offering, the price that's essentially set in the market, the equilibrium price in the market, is about $2. If demand for avocados increases, that price could go up. But Tomer doesn't really have the choice to increase that price. If Tomer does, then no one will buy his avocados because every other stand is offering the avocados at $2. That means Tomer has a demand curve that's perfectly elastic. Tomer can sell any quantity of avocados that Tomer wants at the market price. Okay, so this is a theoretical model that suggests if you are a perfect competitor, you have no choice but to sell the avocado, every single next avocado. The first avocado, how much is it? $2. The second avocado, how much is it? $2. Third avocado, right? So if you sell 100 avocados, your revenue, your total revenue is $200. $2 times 100 avocados, that's your total revenue. Every single next avocado, what we would call our marginal revenue, is going to earn Tomer $2. And the revenue on average, if Tomer sells 80 or produces 80 avocados, sells 80 avocados, that will be $2. Okay, so you have a revenue curve, and look at the demand curve as a revenue curve. Okay, every single next quantity, if we had that x-axis noted as like the first, the second, the third, the fourth avocado, every single next avocado would be bringing in $2, a consistent $2. It's not increasing, not decreasing, always $2, right? The only time that price would increase and we'd see that whole elastic demand curve shift up is if in the market there was a massive increase for avocado. Say, guacamole has all of a sudden some sort of, health properties and everybody wants it. All of a sudden the market price could increase, and Tomer and all of the other avocado stands would then see a higher price. But right now, price is $2, and we're looking at what we would call demand curve graphing as a horizontal line or perfectly elastic. Okay, the definitions that we're interested in to introduce perfect competition will be revenue. And we're going to see this in all of our market models, the idea that there's total revenue, marginal revenue, average revenue. It just looks a little different in perfect competition. So we're using this first market to introduce some of these terms. Average revenue, okay, and maybe first look in the middle of this. Total revenue is price times quantity. So $2 times 100, $2 times 1,000, however many avocados Tomer is going to sell. Every one that he sells earns him $2 of revenue. So that's total revenue. The extra revenue from one more unit will be the change in total revenue over the change in quantity. That is always going to be $2, okay, in the example that we just used, right? The change in total revenue over the change in quantity. And then you also can look at the average revenue. If you take the total revenue and you divide it by the quantity, so total revenue of 200 divided by 100, you're going to get $2. Okay, so your average revenue is $2, your total revenue is $2, your marginal revenue is $2, and that's total revenue would be 100 times $2 or whatever your quantity choice was. Okay, and we'll practice this again. This is kind of introductory. When you look at how this graphs, okay, so this is now revenue. We've been looking at costs for the last week or so. This is revenue. When we look for profit, we're interacting costs and revenue. So we're not putting costs on here yet. We're just looking at revenue. But the next step that we're going to do is put costs and revenue together. And that's going to, hopefully give us an opportunity to make sense of profit and where profit comes from. What we're looking at here is a numerical example of what we did before with Tomer and the $2. Assume that Anthony is making a good, let's say, computer keyboards, and they cost $131, right? It's a homogeneous product, everybody's keyboard, let's assume it's homogeneous and they all look kind of the same. And I know they're not, but let's say that they are. $131. So the firm is going to see perfectly elastic demand, okay? The demand curve is that constant curve where we see $131. That's also the marginal revenue curve, and it's also our average revenue curve. It's all of those things. When we see total revenue, okay, total revenue is an upward sloping curve because total revenue keeps increasing by $131. So the first one is $131. The next one brings in an additional $131. So now your total revenue is $262. Then another $131. 393 is your total. Every single time you sell another good, you're bringing in an additional $131. So total revenue curve is upward sloping because it's increasing and increasing and increasing by $131 every single time. Your marginal revenue, however, is constant because it's always going to be the next one is selling for $131, $131, $131. Okay. That's the concept behind average total and marginal revenue. It doesn't differ that much from the way we looked at costs, average cost, total cost, marginal cost. Okay. And of course, these are things that we're going to interact. A firm is always going to ask three questions. Okay. The three questions: should the firm produce? Should the firm actually operate, or should it shut down? If the firm operates, so let's say Tomer and the avocados, what amount? What's the best possible amount? And at that amount, what economic profit or loss will be realized? Okay, so if firms kind of have a shorthand to figure out, how do they know what quantity to produce? If they can figure out what's the best quantity to produce, the best one, one that maximizes their profit, then at that quantity, what will be their economic profit or loss? Sometimes a loss is the best a firm can do, but you want to minimize a loss. Firms don't just pick any quantity to produce because they feel like it. There is a very calculated decision about what quantity to produce. Okay, and at that best quantity, what is happening? Is it a profit or a loss? And it all depends on whether total revenues are greater than total costs, or total costs are greater than total revenue. Okay, so one thing that we can do is look at total cost and total revenue. Here we have what we had been looking at are all these data charts, and this looks like, oh, Mrs. Wallace, what are you doing to me? Got so much stuff here, but it's not so bad. Let's look at Anthony's business, and he's producing 1 keyboard, 2 keyboard, 3 keyboard, 4 keyboard, all the way up to 10 keyboards. His total fixed cost, as we know, total fixed costs are constant. So he's paying total fixed cost of $100. Total variable costs, this is total variable cost, not average variable cost, total variable cost, we can see are upwards, okay, and affected by diminishing returns. And total costs, just the sum of total fixed costs and total variable costs. So even if Anthony produces nothing, he has a total cost of $100 because that's his total fixed cost. When he produces the first good, he's got $100 of fixed cost plus the $90 of variable cost, and so on. For every next good that he's producing, the total cost is increasing. Now we have the new thing that we're interested in. What happens if we have this column of total cost? What happens to cost as we increase our production from 1 to 10? And what's happening to our revenue? And this is the example as before, where revenue is increasing by $131, $131, right? We can interact this information and say, well, should I produce 2? Well, if I produce, 2 units of keyboards, my total cost will be $270, and my total revenue is $262. Should I do that? No, that's a bad idea. Should I produce the 4 units? Well, now my total revenue is greater than my total cost. My total revenue is $524, and my total cost is $400. Great, I should produce 4. But is that where my the gap between my total revenue and my total cost, or my profit, in other words, is that the place where it's the biggest? Okay, I don't want to settle for 4 if I could get more profit from 5, or even more profit from 6. So I really want to have a column, and this is what we see at the very, very end. What is the difference between total cost and total revenue? What is really the difference between total revenue minus total cost? Do I have a negative profit or a loss, or do I have a profit? So like in the 4th unit, I noted that my total revenue was higher than my total cost, higher by $124. So should I produce the 4th unit? Absolutely, right? Totally. But I should also produce the 5th unit, because the 5th unit gives me even more profit. And if I look at this chart and I kind of say, at what quantity should I produce where I'm going to gain the largest profit, where I have the biggest gap between my total revenue and my total costs? I should produce 9 units. When I produce 9 units, I will make $299 worth of profit. At any other quantity, I make less than that. Okay, so this is a way of looking at total revenue and total cost to see what would be my total profit or my total loss. Okay, and I don't start producing a positive profit until the production of the third good. This is Anthony with his keyboards. But I really wouldn't want to stop at the third good because I'd be leaving some profit on the table. Okay, if you look at this graphically, and this is the last thing we'll look at, this is the total revenue, total cost. I'm not looking at a graph with marginal cost and average total cost and average variable costs and all those things. I will want to do that. That'll be our next lesson. This is looking at total revenue and total costs, okay? There is our upward sloping total revenue curve. You can see the slope, it's always changing by $131. So it's just increasing by the same exact, it's got constant slope, boom. The total cost curve looks like it did when we looked at total costs. It is a sum of your total fixed and your total variable. So it's got that kind of shape where we're going to see the total cost curve have this like bend in it. And when I produce 9 units, okay, at 9 units, my total cost is this number right here, but my total revenue is much higher, okay? This is the place where the gap is much greater, okay? And I can see at 9 units, my total profit is biggest. So that's where I should produce. I am going to stop here and leave you something to read and check out in your textbook. The next chapter in the textbook addresses costs and revenue. It will explain costs and revenue together and introduce marginal analysis, how not to only use total revenue and total costs, but how to use those per unit costs and marginal revenue together to find the ideal quantity. Both what we're doing in this graph and what you're going to be reading about has one purpose. What is the best quantity a firm should produce? Once the firm knows that quantity, then it can ask a question about will I be making a profit or not? So we'll look at some of that on Thursday, but check out the reading and checking the understanding question so that you can get started on some of this content in the textbook. Okay, be well. I'll see you on Thursday.